fireworks in the sky over our nation's capital. January 20th, 2021. This has been a uniquely historic Inauguration Day. Thanks to all of our performers, friends, and neighbors who celebrated America with us. And once again, congratulations, President Biden and Vice President Harris. Godspeed your efforts. From the Lincoln Memorial, good night, America.
#1 brand in America. Don't miss Fox News Channel's brand new afternoon lineup.
It's been a privilege, and that concludes our special live coverage of this Inauguration Day for President Biden and Vice President Harris. It was an inauguration from start to finish like no other. I'm Judy Woodruff. Join us online and again right here tomorrow evening as we examine the first full day of this new administration. For all of us at the PBS NewsHour, thank you. We hope you'll stay safe. Good night.
This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from
the guy you see, Hunter.
Jim Acosta he refers to President Trump in exile. Okay, I won't argue with him.
Yeah, well, we'll see how long they can stop the fixation on Donald Trump. I think it'll last about, I don't know, just name me another couple hours.
Never. Okay.
All right,
exactly.
Hannity, great show. Great to see you.
Thanks.
All right, I'm Laura Ingraham. This is the Ingraham Angle from Washington tonight. The Biden inaugural just wrapping up for the night. And we're here to break down everything you saw or you avoided. Victor Davis Hanson, Dinesh D'Souza, Ben Devenich, and Shelby Steele are all here. They're going to offer unrivaled analysis. Plus, Raymond Arroyo is here with all this.
Of this event managed to do is that they gave us that, which we needed, right? We needed an answer. We needed that resistance. But they also gave us joy. They gave us fashion. They gave us celebrity. They gave us hope. We had an incredible inaugural earlier in the day where we saw the first black woman, first Asian American woman, first woman, period, vice president, you know, do the walk, get sworn in, do all of that great stuff. We saw Joe Biden, who's lived his whole life for this moment. Look at all he's lost and all he's sacrificed to get here and have this chance to really change the country in a profound way. They did that thing. They did all of that. Then they went to work. They did a work day. They gave us a press conference where there were no lies, where it was like, all right, we got the opportunity to rediscover what it looks like to have a real normal administration, like aggressive normalcy. Was that what we were calling it today? We got that. The current arrangement.
The presidency, in many ways, is the story that you tell about the country. And Joe Biden told today the story of the America that he believes in, the North Star he's driving to, and that is really, really important. Tomorrow, reality hits because it always becomes more complicated when the details come into conflict or come into contact with the narrative. And the challenge will be to continue the momentum of today. But the good news is he had a wonderful, wonderful day, and now he's just got 3 years and 364 more days to close out a triumphant administration.
Well, so Evan, I think one of the things that's so powerful about what they chose to do today is not pretend as though this is not a country suffering trauma and grief. They acknowledge the hurt, and yet it's our history. They acknowledge the pain, but they also embrace the promise, and they acknowledge the grief, but they also embrace the greatness of America. Yeah. And the two can exist at the same time, the pain and...
Calmed life up to this point.
Oh, fuck.
With a roommate?
The funding for the program
span of emotion, we cross the span of American experience and background and the styles of our cultural life, and we ended up with this encompassing display at the end. You know, this is a gesture of inclusion. I was reminded also today something that Roosevelt said in 1933 in a moment of enormous challenge for this country. He said, "Only a foolish optimist can deny the dark realities of the moment," but he also did it while launching us on the kind of hard work and constructive projects that eventually got us where we are. And you know, Amanda Gorman had a brilliant line in her poem. She said, "America is more than a prize we inherit. It is on us.
Yeah.
We have to make it."
Yeah, Robert Kennedy said the future is not a gift, it's an achievement. And that is something we have to bear in mind. The project of
Evil.
America has been through a civil war, world wars, a Great Depression, pandemics, McCarthyism, and now a Trumpist and white nationalist insurrection.
The truth is, President Trump spent his presidency inflaming hate, white supremacy, anti-Semitism, and violence.
Root out white supremacy, starting with impeaching the white supremacist in chief.
Now, let's be clear. I don't think Biden believes that the United States is a racist country dominated by white supremacists. Remember, he spent his whole career working with many Americans of different backgrounds, including Republicans. And he knows that those charges from the left simply aren't true. In fact, he keeps telling us that Americans are good people. Sadly,
disasters brought together to lead, for example, on trying to build confidence in the vaccine in the face of a global pandemic. They're brought together when something is very wrong, and we need to put politics aside and show that at the worst times we can call on our leaders of different stripes and of different marching orders, and they will help us, despite the fact that we're a divided people most of the time. In seeing them, it made me feel more serious about the crisis I think that we are in, because that's the only context in which we see former presidents from different parties speaking together like this. I have to say, it made me also feel, maybe in the spirit of your friend Lawrence, who came to you and said, can't all inaugurations be virtual like this? It made me wish that there were more moments like this with former presidents and different statesmen, different leaders of different persuasions who came together more often. I wish we didn't save it for the worst moments in our lives.
You know, Rachel, I suspect this is something that might not have happened if it wasn't a virtual event.
Exactly.
Because if it wasn't, remember what would be going on in Washington at this time. The poor Bidens and Kamala Harris and Doug would be running around to 15 different inaugural balls and going in for one dance and then getting dragged off to the next one, and this endless night, and there's nothing important to aim a camera at, usually, on inauguration night. But getting those presidents together, I think, was one of the creative things that came out of being forced into the virtual format. Someone came up with the idea of, well, they're here, what can we do with them? Because, you know, on a normal inauguration night, they would be long gone from having anything to do with what's going on here. You know, they would have done their solidarity bit on the platform, and that would have been it.
Yeah. It will be interesting to see how that moment from George W. Bush is received among Republicans. I mean, the battle between Trumpism and Republicanism is as yet unsettled. And to the extent that this is seen as President George W. Bush making common cause with other former presidents, in part because of the crisis in our country. Well, because the crisis in our country is not just COVID. The crisis in our country is also the crisis of our democracy, brought about by what we just went through with this president. I mean, does that call the question in terms of the Republican Party versus Trumpism in a way that hasn't been pushed that far before? I mean, we'll see.
Rachel, in our politics, what matters is not so much
worldviews of Joe Biden and Donald Trump, or the philosophy of Donald Trump. Donald Trump believes that the world is a jungle. He was raised to believe you are either a killer or was it a winner or no, you're a killer or a loser. A killer or a loser. Right. The world is a jungle. You know, and the survival of the fittest. You know, Joe Biden is quoting St. Augustine today.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a different view of the world, and I think it's more attuned to the way most Americans want to think of our country.
Well, also, you think about the three presidents, the three former presidents that we saw gathered together to speak about this moment in history, to speak about the new president. The former president who just left office could have been among those three. It could have been four. And forevermore now, one considers when there are gatherings of all the presidents, will the most recent president who just left, will he be in there?
Not a chance.
Probably not. I've been thinking about this a lot. If the two things had happened, Donald Trump would have left Washington in a much different way today. If during this pandemic he had leveled with people, and if he had just advocated from the beginning that people wear masks, that would be one thing. And then obviously, if he had accepted the results of the election, and he had done what other presidents, all other presidents have done in assisting his successor and leaving gracefully, as he praised Barack Obama for doing 4 years ago in his own speech, in his inaugural address. I think he would have left under, he essentially destroyed what was left of his reputation in these last 2 months, and he made himself a pariah by fundamentally waging war on our democracy.
But he has always been the architect of his own demise. He always has self-inflicted wounds. We've watched that for the last 4 years, and he couldn't admit that he lost.
Can I say one thing that was cool? The educators, when they celebrated, my mom was a teacher, my dad was a teacher, and the fact that you had teachers who are on the front lines who wanted to be able to help kids, and they were, you know, to lift up teachers, the UPS worker. I mean, to me, that is the point. This was Joe Biden's biggest day, and it wasn't about Joe Biden. Think about that. All he's been through, he's been trying to get there, and when he gets there, he doesn't make it about Joe Biden. He makes it about the teachers and the workers and the hungry kids. That is a cultural shift, not just a political shift.
And also, I mean, from all we've heard from Joe Biden today, none of it has been, I had the biggest crowd, I was the greatest, I've done this for a long time, let me tell you about me. It was about America.
Yeah, you know, he called himself at one point in this campaign a transition president. That's what he wanted to be. And what he meant by that was, I want to open the door for new people to come in. And what did we hear today? We heard a poet in her early 20s tell us things about ourselves we couldn't put into words.
That's right.
This is a country today, the median age in America is 38. The average senator is 68. We are approaching a moment in which there is going to be a transition, a kind of, we are trying to get two generations talking to each other. We are coexisting, we are living with one another, and it's not easy. You know, we're not always talking so clearly to one another. And Joe Biden, who is, after all, the oldest president coming into office, is saying to people, I want to learn from you, I want to hear from you.
You know, in a way, he did talk of himself as a transitional leader. But look at what he's facing. In many ways, he's going to have to be transformational. He has no choice. And so you're right, talking about generations and bringing in younger people, etc. But he's going to have to do more in so many ways than anybody in his first 100 days in office in a long time. And what was so interesting to me, hearing these three former presidents, the three amigos, standing there talking to each other, is they said to Joe Biden, we are available to you in any way we can help. And can you imagine the previous president calling up these folks and saying, hey, we're having a bit of can you give me some advice? I can imagine Biden getting on the phone with any of these people, right? I mean, I can imagine him calling up Barack Obama, calling up George W. Bush, and saying, help me out, help me out.
And even deposit check.
Back to Jake with just the final word. Up out of the shade of flame and unafraid, the new dawn blooms as we free it, for there was always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. Jake?
Anderson, thanks so much. And I'll tell you, we had a little bit of a view of the fireworks here from our perch with the White House right there. And I've been in Washington now for almost 30 years, and I've never seen a fireworks display like that, ever. it was quite something. It was quite spectacular.
Our friend Wolf Blitzer says all the time that our jobs are great because we get a front row seat to history, and we did that all day today, but we also got a front row seat to a really amazing fireworks display. I completely agree with you. I've seen so many fireworks over the mall over the year. I went to school here. I've been here ever since, and nothing compares to this. It does help that we're overlooking the White House.
It's also nice to see the monuments being used in lieu of other things. I mean, I think under normal circumstances, we wouldn't be talking about, you know, fireworks over the Washington Monument or the Lincoln Memorial or Tom Hanks narrating an inaugural. Tom Hanks needed a jacket, but it was a nice replacement for what we usually do. And I think that people at home would have found it to be just kind of a special moment and an opportunity to kind of see a little bit of normal life that maybe they'd missed. A lot of people haven't been going to concerts for months and months and months, and so seeing a lot of their favorite stars and celebrities, this is the night for that.
Yeah, and look, I understand that there's a real desire to feel good after a long time of not, because of the pandemic and because of what the country's been going through the last couple months in particular. And certainly seeing Presidents Clinton and Obama and Bush together speaking like fellow Americans, speaking like colleagues, if not friends, is reassuring. But I have to say, you know, what Bush said, President Bush said, the fact that the three of us are standing here talking about a peaceful transfer of power speaks to the institutional integrity of our country.
Mr. President.
There wasn't a peaceful transfer of power. People were killed because there was an insurrection incited by President Trump. And you know, then it would cut to Tom Hanks talking about how world leaders were no doubt, or people around the world were no doubt looking at the three presidents and thinking how great it is. I don't know that we command that respect around the world after these last couple months.
I take your point, but it was aspirational. It was, you know, showing just first of all, the image. I kind of gasped when I saw the three of them standing there at that memorial, because I've never seen anything like that. And the fact that they came together, obviously, they all know each other quite well, but the fact that they agreed to do this, to send a signal that despite what happened 2 weeks ago today, that this is what America should stand for and is going to stand for again with Joe Biden as president. And yeah, of course there wasn't a peaceful transfer of power. I agree with that.
My concern
that was a step too far.
Is that if we whitewash it and paper over it, then it can happen again, except next time it will work. That's my concern.
I think this was supposed to be comforting.
Yeah, exactly.
To Americans.
I get it.
You know, look, I mean, what happened 2 weeks ago was really traumatic for a lot of people. Frankly, the last 4 years was really traumatic for a lot of people who didn't vote for Donald Trump. And I do think what they were trying to do tonight was give people just a glimpse of what the normal life might look like, what you know, regular old former presidents look like when they come together. And it's remarkable, but only because the last president was such an anomaly. But I think the goal here tonight was to remind people that America is still America at the end of the day. And yeah, they were talking about a peaceful transfer of power. We didn't have one,
right?
But they were discussing that idea.
And it was written that way cleverly.
Right.
The fact that the three of us are standing here talking about a peaceful transfer of power speaks to the institutional integrity of our country. But that, all I'm saying is, and I'm not trying to be Professor Buzzkill here, but all I'm saying is that there are questions about the institutional integrity of our country. And if McCarthy had been Speaker and not House Minority Leader, and if 20 different officials out there, whether it's the governor of Arizona or the governor of Georgia or some, you know, a couple officials in Michigan or Arizona or whatever, had been of weaker character, I don't know what would be going on in this country right now. And I want people to feel comforted. I want people to feel good. I want to enjoy this, but at the same time, I don't want to paper over what happened.
You're absolutely right. The line that I thought really stuck out, since George W. Bush was the only Republican standing there, was Mr. President talking to Joe Biden, the new president. I'm pulling for your success. Your success is our country's success, and God bless you. it sounds like, was this his letter?
That is, yeah, it very closely mirrors his letter.
The letter that he wrote to President Obama, and he's saying that again in public in this tribute with the two other former presidents now to President Biden. That was very telling, especially given the fact, as I said, that he was the only Republican standing there. He was trying to send a message.
Yeah, no, look, absolutely. The fact that they did this video is because they know the nation needs to see it. I mean, they don't do this every 4 years or 8 years. The former presidents don't go onto a memorial and do a little get well video to the nation. Let me bring in Kate Anderson-Brower, a historian and CNN commentator, to talk about this video. We've really...
If no one among us is capable of governing themselves, then who among us is capable of governing somebody else? There are no money lines, there are no sparkle lines in this, and it'll quickly be forgotten.
Well, a couple of historians on Trump's legacy over at CNN. Watch.
When we look at the death toll as it grows every day, you feel that Donald Trump is implicated. In my mind, puts him at the rank bottom.
He has surpassed in awfulness Presidents Pierce, Buchanan, Johnson, and Richard Nixon.
Craig, he has surpassed an awfulness. An awfulness. That is, when I think of presidential historians, I think he has surpassed an awfulness. Craig, yeah. I'm sorry. Maybe they're nice people, but it's abominably bad analysis, and they're not even trying.
I agree. This is the lazy historian analysis, is that when the ground... Look, it took 150 years for a decent biography to be written about Andrew Jackson, The Age of Jackson by Arthur Schlesinger. And it won't take 150 years, but in a relatively short amount of time, and it depends on how Biden does too, to a certain extent, but in a relatively short period of time, people are going to look at the Trump presidency and separate out the personality and just focus on the remarkable accomplishments of 4 years, and they will regard the 4 years of Donald Trump as being a pretty darn good presidency for 4 years, when a lot of things were turned around, a lot of things were changed, a lot of things were gotten done. That will not...
Having been part of history upon history upon history, as we were just discussing with Reverend Warnock, how do you feel? I imagine exhausted is part of it, but how else do you feel?
A little exhausted, a little elated because of the history that's been made today. You know, hit the nail on the head in the previous segment. You know, historic vice president, first woman, first African American, first Asian vice president of the United States, swearing in the first Jewish American, African American senators from Georgia, and of course myself making history on behalf of California. That picture, oh my gosh, it just says so much in one. But I got to tell you, it's sobered by the work that we know lies ahead of us. The COVID-19 pandemic is still raging, as we heard in President Biden's speech earlier today. And so, you know, between getting our arms around the pandemic, rebuilding the economy, advancing equity in all its forms, we certainly have a lot of work to do, but majorities with which to work from. And before I get to the next question, just a quick thought for Senator Warnock. When we met earlier, just before the swearing in, was telling how I had a chance to visit Ebenezer Church. Back in 2018, I was out there campaigning, and he didn't invite me to come back and campaign for him next year. He said, Juan, come back and worship. So I think he's true to his word when he said he's not interested in being a politician. He wants to continue to be a servant, and I certainly appreciate that, and I'm inspired by that.
Senator Padilla, this is Lawrence O'Donnell. You, among the three being sworn in today, are the only one who didn't have to run for that seat. You were appointed. Do you feel you have to now prove your value to the Californians who didn't get a chance to vote for you for this seat? And of course, I know I'm not the first one to break it to you, but you're going to have to run for this seat in 2022 if you want to hold on to it. So maybe you get this weekend off, but California senators needing to fund a campaign find that to be, in and of itself, almost a full-time job.
It is. So certainly a lot on the plate on the official side, and we're going to ramp up the re-election campaign quickly as well. Look, the voters will have their say. They'll have their say in 2022. I like to think that voters have been able to have their say starting in 1999 when I first ran for the city council in Los Angeles, in 2006 when I ran for the state senate, and in 2014 when I was first elected Secretary of State. So is it more work? Yes, but Lawrence, I've been having to prove myself my whole life. So working extra hard just to get even half the respect, that's just the way it is for far too many people, and even U.S. senators are no exception sometimes.
Senator, one advantage you have is that since you haven't been in the Washington end of California politics, back in your home state, you were probably constantly hearing complaints, questions, issues, why aren't they doing this, why aren't they doing that, about what Washington isn't doing for California. What can you tell us about what you might bring to this that we haven't seen from a California senator yet?
Yeah, look, I think twofold. One, this is a very within California thing. I'm the first Southern California United States senator in a long, long time. Doesn't mean I'm only going to represent the southern half of the state, but the greater Los Angeles area being the largest population base in the state, and maybe a better appreciation and understanding of some of the Southern California issues are part of it. I think in my journey, the first Latino in California history to enter the United States Senate gives me that unique life experience to bring to bear in all the deliberations of the United States Senate. But I'm going to work hard to be the best senator I can be for all California.
Senator Padilla, congratulations, first of all, on your being sworn in today. Question about the body in which you're about to be working. Josh Hawley has already made it his business to try to interrupt the confirmation of the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, and he based that on the usual right-wing memes about caravans and his personal opposition to DACA, and believing that that should not, that people who are right now enjoy protection under DACA should not have that protection. Given that, how difficult do you think it's going to be to achieve Joe Biden's stated goal of having an immigration reform plan go through? Republicans look like they're not going to change their attitude. This is an issue that really does concern California in a very big way.
Right. Look, I think that's why the two victories in Georgia were so important. It may be a razor-thin majority, but it is a majority nonetheless for Democrats in the United States Senate, together with the majority in the House of Representatives, Joe Biden in the White House. I'm not suggesting any of the work is going to be easy, whether it's comprehensive immigration reform, certainly a more equitable and sufficient COVID response, tackling climate change, criminal justice reform, and more. But we have the numbers barely by an edge, and we can't afford to be bashful. We have to be bold in both policy and in strategy to get things done.
Newly minted messages in the articles and see what stood out. And there's a line in the poem that you might have heard, which is, we've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it. And I got that actually from looking through a few tweets and a lot of people being like, wow, this is what happens when people don't want to share the country with the rest of us. And so I took that, which often became a meme on Twitter, and I put that in the poem.
It's so interesting to me that you're not thinking visual, that it's not the images that motivate you, it's the text, the words that you come across.
To me, words matter, and I think that's kind of what made this inauguration that much more sentimental and special. We've seen over the past few years the ways in which the power of words has been violated and misappropriated. And what I wanted to do is to kind of reclaim poetry as that site in which we can re-purify, re-sanctify not only the Capitol building that we saw violated, but the power of words, and to invest that in kind of the highest office of the land.
I want to read just the last few lines of your poem, and I apologize because I'm not going to do it justice as it should be done, but you said, "We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge, battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it." I got shivers when you said that. I mean, that is what it takes, isn't it? It's bravery. It takes bravery to see it and to be that light.
Right. Well, I think that recitation was great. You know, I should have had you up there with me. That was amazing. But, you know, I'm so grateful you brought up the last line. It's something that I've been seeing a lot of people repeat. And to be honest, I was concerned of whether I should include that last line of be it at all. I was kind of deliberating between see it, be it, free it, and then I said, you know what, we need all of these things at once. We need that cacophony. We need to realize that hope isn't something that we ask of others. It's something that we have to demand from ourselves, and that's what I wanted the poem to end on.
I had a form of dyslexia as a child and a kind of a minor speech issue, so slight little stutter. And Joe Biden has talked about this. I read that you had some form of a speech impediment or may still have, which is obviously something you would have in common with President Biden. He's talked often about overcoming it, and I understand that you use writing to cope with it, to share your voice that way. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I'm proud to be in the speech difficulty club with you and President Biden and also Maya Angelou. You know, growing up, I had a speech impediment, and for me, it wasn't the stutter. It was, you know, dropping a whole swath of letters in the alphabet. So for, I want to say, most of my life, up until 2 or maybe 3 years ago, I couldn't say the letter R. Even to this day, sometimes I struggle with it, which is difficult when you have a poem in which you say rise, like 5 times. And so for me, I used writing, one, as a form of self-expression to get my voice on the page, but then it also metamorphosized into its own speech pathology. So the more that I recited out loud, the more in which I practiced spoken word in that tradition, the more I was able to teach myself how to pronounce these letters, which for so long had been my greatest impediment.
I understand. Was there? I know there were some Hamilton references today. I caught as a big fan of Hamilton, and I know Lin-Manuel Miranda also caught them because I know I saw those tweets going around. But I understand. Is there something about some of the stuff that Aaron Burr said in Hamilton that you use for your speech?
Right, so like I said, you know, it was as recent as college that I was still struggling to say the R sound. And so one thing that I would do to try to train myself to say it is I would listen to the song Aaron Burr, Sir, which is just packed with R's. And I would try to keep up with Leslie Odom Jr. as he's, you know, doing this amazing rap. And I'd say, if I can train myself to do this song, then I can train myself to say this letter. And so that's been a huge part of my own speech pathology. It's why I included it in the inaugural poem. Also beyond that, I think Hamilton is just such a great kind of American cultural piece of what it means to be a better country. It was really hard for me not just to like copy and paste my shot and email it to me. Like, here's my poem.
No one would have noticed, yeah.
No one would have noticed, but I cite my sources, which is why I tweeted about Hamilton. I'm really proud that I was able to incorporate that in there.
I understand you have a mantra that you say before every reading you give. Can you reveal what that is?
Certainly. I do it whenever I perform, and I definitely did it this time. And I close my eyes and I say, I'm the daughter of black writers. We are descended from freedom fighters who broke their chains and changed the world. They call me.
Wow. Wow, you're awesome. I'm so transfixed. Liza, your mom must just be so proud of you, and your whole family, and you must be so proud of them.
Yeah, I say, you know, I'm proud of us because this really takes a village. I have so many supporters, so many organizations that have supported me, whether it be Urban Word, the National Youth Poet Laureate Program, or White Girl LA, where I got a lot of free creative writing resources when I was that skinny girl with a speech impediment who needed a mentor. My mom is actually filming me right now as I do this interview. So like I said, it takes all of us being present and lifting me up to climb this mountain.
Well, Mom, congratulations. You've certainly done an amazing, amazing job. Lastly, Hillary Clinton tweeted a picture of you two from the inauguration today saying, wasn't at the Amanda Gorman's poem just stunning? She's promised to run for president in 2036, and I, for one, can't wait. President Gorman has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Madam President Gorman, I like the sound of that.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people like the sound of that today. Thank you so much. It's just thrilling to see such a bright talent suddenly burst like a supernova. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
I mean,
really?
But also at home, especially in those cases where individual rights have been denied in favor of group rights. John C. Calhoun did that as a way to defend slavery, and his, of course, was denounced by Abraham Lincoln. But say there are others who have denied equal rights and are turning to arguments of group rights in the form of identity politics, and we called that out as well. So I think that that argument, that claim of equal rights that really goes back to our founders, that we've always turned back to for sources of unity, is now divisive within liberalism. And the fact that he had to get rid of this at the immediate moment of his new presidency, unfortunately tells us a lot about where liberalism is right now, and it's turning away from those great liberating and unifying principles of the American founding.
I'd say they're anti-science in many cases and anti-history, certainly in this case. And the media would shock you, Matthew, to find out that the media also took almost universal issue with the commission.
You look at that 1776 garbage he put out yesterday. These aren't the attempts to bring America together.
There's a lot of dog whistling and a lot of using of the racial bullhorn.
With a new version of history that says, no, slavery was fine, it's all good, don't say mean things about our founders.
First of all, Jim Acosta, can he spew more tired bromides in one report? Did y'all claim slavery was all A-okay there, Dr. Spalding?
So look, the problem with most modern revisionist history is they see all negative, it's all flaws, and it's a bad country from the beginning. The claim of systemic racism. That's not actually history. That's ideology meant to manipulate minds rather than educate them. Real history, good history, honest history, looks at everything that happened, looks at the record, the facts, warts and all, and looks at it honestly. And what we see is a nation based on a claim of principle that all men are created equal, and then aspiring to live up to those principles. It's imperfect. We're flawed people, as all people are, but we are a nation that has done a great job trying to live up to those principles, building a great nation and a noble nation.
Yeah, Dr. Spalding, great to...
organizers, of activists, and of civil rights lawyers. I was a lot younger and prettier a few years ago. We are working overtime and had to work overtime in order to ensure that black voters could participate equally in this election. It took our suit against the United States Post Office. It took on-the-ground voter protection work for every aspect of this election. It took working to ensure that there would be absentee ballots that were counted. It took our partnership with LeBron James to make sure we had polling place workers so that polling places were open. What people don't see is they look at the result and they don't recognize the Herculean effort that it took to make it happen. And in a democracy, this should not be necessary. They're not counting the 4 hours that people stood online to vote. They're not counting the people who passed out online because they were exhausted but refused to leave because they wanted to cast their ballots. You know that we filed a suit still pending against President Trump, former President Trump, and against the Republican National Committee for their efforts to discount the votes of black voters in Detroit and in other places around the country after the election. So all of this effort, time, energy, resources that went into making sure these votes were cast and could be counted, people have to understand that just looking at the result doesn't take account of that. And we want to make sure that as we move forward, there's 2 important bills in Congress that have passed the House already, H.R. 1, the For the People Act, and H.R. 4, the John Lewis Voting Rights Restoration Act, both of which are essential to ensuring that we have an election system worthy of a democracy, worthy of a sophisticated democracy, which America purports to be. And we need this to happen. It can't take all of this effort that it took this year just to ensure that adult citizens who have the right to vote have their votes counted and are able to cast their votes without impediment.
Sherilyn, it's Lawrence O'Donnell, and first of all, I haven't seen you beaming like this in about 4 years, so I'm really happy to see that. I want you to guide us through this night of firsts. We have our first black senator from Georgia, our first Jewish senator from Georgia, and in the biggest overlooked first of the day, we have our first Jewish majority leader of the United States Senate, and then we have our triple firsts in Kamala Harris. I feel funny about these firsts. I celebrate them. I feel the joy in them, and I feel an embarrassment for us that our first black woman running for president was 1972 with Shirley Chisholm. Geraldine Ferraro, the first woman on a vice presidential ballot in 1984. And here we are 36 years later, and the woman makes it all the way. But how do we balance this, the joy of the firsts, with the embarrassment that it took this long?
Well, I think we do it by doing two things. One, recognizing that every piece of progress in this country, especially racial progress, is hard fought for. It takes effort and sacrifice and often blood. And therefore, it is incumbent upon us to celebrate when we pass these milestones. But we can't pat ourselves on the back. And this is one of the things I worry about now that Trump is out of office, that we will revert to what often happens in this country. America pats itself on the back and says, look, democracy righted itself. You elected a woman and a woman of color as your vice president. And as you say, you're going to have the first Jewish majority leader, and Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff were elected in Georgia, and people will say, hooray, you see, it's not as bad as you thought. And to that I say, no, America cannot pat itself on the back, because as I just suggested, the effort that it takes to overcome these barriers at this point in 2021 is shameful for this country. And we have to also recognize that we still don't know yet what this country could be if we lifted the shackles of white supremacy. What we saw 3 weeks ago, Lawrence, with the storming of the Capitol, shows you what we're against. It's the people who don't want what we saw today. It's the people who are afraid of that progress, who are continuing to try and nail America's feet to the floor so that we can't make progress. And they are a real force. They are a dangerous force. They are a determined force. We should never underestimate them. They are not solely embodied in one man, Donald Trump, but they live among us. And this is something we have to struggle against. So we can celebrate these firsts and these milestones, but understand there's much more work to be done. And the milestones are not just for the sake of having people who look a particular way in office. They're to actually make change happen. And so as much as I admire and love the vice president, I'm going to be pushing her. I'm going to be pushing Senator Schumer. I'm going to be pushing everyone. When we come to judges, I'm going to be looking at those two new senators from Georgia and pushing them. The point is to make change happen and to make real progress happen and move us towards equality and justice, not just to have a nice photograph that makes America feel good about itself in terms of diversity. So we have lots of work ahead.
Sherilyn Eiffel, before we let you go, I have to confess to you that when I was at home in COVID quarantine on that weekend day when all the networks called the election for Joe Biden, and it became clear that Biden and Harris were going to be going to Washington, one of the things that I did that afternoon is I Googled you to figure out your age, because it occurred to me that day that you have to be seen. And you have to know that you are being seen as a potential shortlist candidate for the Supreme Court if there is a retirement from the Supreme Court, particularly at the start of this administration. Have you thought about that prospect?
No, really, honestly, Rachel, as you can imagine with what has happened over the last 4 years, I've barely had a chance to really think about anything but the work that's in front of us. And I love so much my job and love being a civil rights lawyer. I love leading the Legal Defense Fund. It is the dream of a lifetime. And I don't have those kinds of ambitions. And so I hear all of that chatter, and I think it's perfectly fine. It's great to have your name on short lists. It's fun. But my job is a very heavy lift, and I think about it every day. I'm up most of the night, to be frank, thinking about what I need to do. And so it would be really just kind of out of order for me to be thinking about something beyond what is in front of me, which is really about all I can do and is, as I said, the privilege of a lifetime. And at this moment in particular, it's a pivotal moment. People think we're out of the woods. We're not out of the woods. There's a lot of work to be done, and I take it very seriously, the responsibility of leadership at this moment.
Well, Cheryl Kneiffel, president of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, whether or not it is on your mind every day, I am looking forward to covering your potential confirmation hearings for that job that you are not thinking about. Sherilyn, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right. As I mentioned before we took a break a few moments ago, we have been watching ongoing reporting over the course of the day, including developing stories that maybe could not be told until the administration had actually turned over. Well, here's one of them. The Washington Post has some new reporting tonight on the attack on the Capitol 2 weeks ago. Of course, we have seen new arrests and increasingly serious felony charges brought against individuals every day since the siege 2 weeks ago, including recent charges against people accused of playing an organizing role or even a command and control role in the attack on the Capitol and on Congress. But for the first time tonight, the Washington Post has an unsettling report about what happened inside the Pentagon when besieged lawmakers and police on Capitol Hill called the military and begged them to urgently send in the National Guard. The initial response from the Army to that call for help was no, they wouldn't do it, even though they were informed on that call that the Capitol had been breached, that the protesters were not peaceful. They were told on that call that shots had already been fired. There were reports of shots fired already, but still the Army on that call told Capitol Police they would not send in the National Guard. That remains one of the disturbing failures about how the Capitol fell that day to the pro-Trump mob. Well, now tonight, the Washington Post is reporting that one of the senior officers who was in the room when that call for help was made to the Pentagon, and when the Army response was no, you can't have the help, one of the senior officers in the room at the Pentagon for that call is a general named Charles Flynn. Charles Flynn is the brother of disgraced Trump National Security Advisor Mike Flynn, who of course called on President Trump to use the military and martial law to seize power after the election, who of course encouraged Trump supporters at the Capitol on January 6th, who is a central figure in the QAnon conspiracy theory that drove so many of the fervent attackers on the Capitol on January 6th. Now, what makes this even more disturbing is that the Army had previously repeatedly denied that Mike Flynn's brother Charles was part of that call to the Pentagon on January 6th, part of that decision to deny National Guard support to the Capitol while it was being violently attacked. But the Army's repeated denials that he had nothing to do with that decision, that he wasn't in that meeting, that he wasn't on the call, those were lies. General Charles Flynn and the Army are both now confirming to the Washington Post that, in fact, he was there when the Pentagon fielded that call and did not send the Guard. Just incredibly unnerving news from the Post tonight about this previously unknown role played by Mike Flynn's brother at the Pentagon. Again, that's the Washington Post breaking news tonight. We'll let you know more as we learn more. Stay with us.
It's either the assurance of...
Even unlike President Obama, who was a senator for not very long, Joe Biden knows what he's getting himself into when he talks about the fact that he thinks that he can get things done, even though it is incredibly divisive.
And it's not at all clear to me that he has a willing opposition party in the Republican Party to solve these problems. I think the Republican Party right now is trying to figure itself out, its future in a post-Trump world and what that looks like, and whether that future is, ideological in nature, or whether it is driven by the same kind of personality politics that it had been driven by for the last 4 years. And it seems that Joe Biden he laid out his view of it, which is that, that they are going to sort of snap back to their senses type of thing because the provocateur is no longer there. But I don't think that is clear yet because you're already hearing Republicans making it clear that they don't necessarily want to cooperate on even basic things like his cabinet nominees. And if that's the case, it's going to be a tough ride. And it's probably one of the reasons why, you are going to see probably more executive orders than we are used to in the pre-Trump era You know, Trump did a lot of executive orders, and a lot of them are being undone. But the reality of governance in Washington right now is that it's very difficult to get things through Congress, no matter who the president is, because of the partisanship. And if you're going to deliver for your base and for Joe Biden, Democrats are clamoring for, frankly, for relief on a lot of issues, whether it's on immigration or COVID or what have you. You've got to do it in some ways on your own, and for that reason, it's temporary in nature because the next president can just do away with it.
And the incentive structure is not for cooperation. No. I mean, Mitch McConnell is going to be there as the minority leader in a 50-50 Senate, and he's got some big seats, big races coming up in 2022. Is the incentive for him to, and the Republicans in the Senate, to work with Joe Biden to figure out a way to address climate change? Or is the incentive to let Democrats own it so that the Republicans can run against it? The incentive structure for so much of this is built against cooperation.
Well, so many Republicans in the House and even in the Senate they are not coming from purple places. They're coming from deep red places. And that makes the incentive structure very difficult for cooperation because there is a gulf. The reality is, you know, all the talk of unity aside, there is a huge gulf culturally and politically between the red states and the blue states, and that gulf has not been closed any just because Donald Trump walked off the stage.
Yeah, and the other challenge that we haven't talked about is, we've been talking a lot about unity across party lines, is that, you know, every step that President Biden wants to take towards the Republicans, as he historically does, it's in his DNA to do, which is listen to the other side. What do you need? What can you not give up? What can you give up? When he gets the here's what I can give up, or here's what I can't give up, here's why you need to move, he's going to get an earful from the growing number of real progressives in his party, in the slimmer majority in the House, who are going to say, wait a minute, Mr. President, you can't compromise on that. And so one of the questions is how much running room he is going to have, at least in the beginning, maybe at all, from his own party, who gave him a lot of runway during when he was just making promises and when he was campaigning, whether that's going to be the same when he's actually governing.
And they're impatient. A lot of Democrats.
Speaking of Democrats in the House and Senate, joining us now, the brand new Democratic Senator from the state of California, Alex Padilla. Senator Padilla, congratulations. You were just sworn in today by your predecessor, now Vice President Kamala Harris. Tell us how it feels in that moment when you took your place in the U.S. Senate.
So thank you, Jake. Yes, great day for California, great day for the nation, great day for history. You know, as you know, I'm the first Latino senator to represent California in our 170-year history, and to be administered the oath by the first woman, African-American, Asian vice president, also a Californian, that just oozes history and progress for the nation. I'll have to admit, though, sobered by the daunting task ahead of us to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic and so much more.
President Biden has already sent an immigration bill to the Senate. It has an 8-year path to citizenship. Republicans in the Senate are expressing concerns about it. I know that you have a very moving story. You're a son of Mexican immigrants. As you note, you're the first Latino senator from California. What do you think of this legislation? Does it go far enough for you? Do you support it?
Yeah, look, no, I am supportive of it, but think we might be able to do even more. I know Republican members are already trying to poke holes in it, take shots at it. The 8-year time period to wait, I think it's on the table to maybe shorten that a little bit. But here's another element that hasn't been focused on yet. The cost of the naturalization application itself. It's one thing to say, well, we need a path to citizenship for all undocumented individuals. I firmly believe that. But for the millions of eligible immigrants that can become citizens, sometimes it's frankly cost prohibitive plus the wait times that you're referencing. So there's a lot of layers to immigration reform that I'm hopeful we'll be able to tackle and move quickly on.
Los Angeles in particular continues to struggle with the coronavirus pandemic, just becoming the first county in America to report more than 1 million coronavirus cases. Why is it so bad in Los Angeles? What needs to happen to turn it around there?
Look, I think it's a couple of factors. One, we're in month 10, working on 11 of this pandemic, not month number 1. So folks are hurting, folks are struggling, folks are getting impatient. Maybe you've lost your job, maybe you've lost your business, and maybe you've lost a loved one. Los Angeles County, not just the largest population of any county in America, it's the most diverse population, and we've known since day one from the CDC that communities of color are disproportionately vulnerable to the COVID-19 pandemic from contracting the virus, the impact physiologically, and so it's all those factors now coming home to roost.
Well, it remains to be seen, really, because after there was a riot near the federal courthouse in Portland, the mayor did actually call out Antifa by name and said that they weren't going to take all the rioting that had happened during any months anymore. But again, it just remains to be seen whether or not the city will actually take any harsh action against these groups.
Some things never change, Julio. All right, thanks so much. Now, be glad you weren't watching this cringe that was the celebration tonight at the inaugural. We have the lowlights next.
Their reputation, their insight, your advantage.
We don't just cover financial news, we anticipate it.
Barron's Roundtable, Friday.
The federal government has been largely AWOL, with the exception of the Operation Warp Speed effort to have vaccine companies, manufacturers, develop and produce the vaccines. But they didn't really have a plan for what to do after that. And so now you're going to see the federal government partner with state.
One political party more pleased today.
He represents our interests abroad and is
that Thomas could show his appreciation.
You did it. You sabotaged the transmitter truck.
Snowy. And also worried that agencies like the CDC have been so hollowed out, beaten down, and in some cases corrupted, had their work corrupted by the political influence of the Trump White House, that I'm worried that at least at the outset they may not be up to the task. How do you balance those concerns, or how should I balance them?
Well, I do think there's going to need to be a fair amount of rebuilding at CDC, rebuilding of morale, and rebuilding of staff, frankly. They have lost staff due to attrition, not enough funding being invested in the CDC, and that really predates even the pandemic. Part of the reason Dr. Walensky was nominated to lead the CDC is because she is an outsider. She is a top scientist in her field. And having worked in the field of HIV for years, she really understands what it is to manage and respond to an infectious disease pandemic that also has political aspects to it. So, she's somebody who really will be able to look at what's happening at CDC objectively as someone coming in from the outside and figuring out how to rectify things moving forward.
I know people who work at CDC. I've had sources in the agency and have been reporting on them for a long time. Hearing people's confidence in knowing that it's Ann Schuchat, the deputy director, who's going to be doing the review of the COVID-19 guidance made me feel better today, knowing the confidence that people who work at that agency still have with her. So maybe that is the place to start. Dr. Shalene Gounder, epidemiologist, member of the Biden Transition COVID Advisory Board. Thank you for your work with the transition, and thanks for helping us understand tonight.
Thank you.
All right, we'll be right back. Stay with us.
Are you managing your
in theaters and streaming exclusively on HBO Max January.
Assuming the balance of nature.
I think that every woman who becomes pregnant should take balance of nature. It's probably the most important thing I do every day.
You don't know what you do with that.
Inside, outside, inside, outside, inside, outside. Order for curbside pickup.
With U.S. leadership over the
that likes or likes someone.
With your love gift of support, can this...
Eric, please accept my apology.
Dilate blood vessels and...
About how the treatment can benefit.
Won 4 in a row, but struggling with a winless Washington team, at least in conference play. And off the...
Akeem.
People... seed.
Norton 3-6.
See what you do in high school and be...
Saturdays and Sundays at 6.
Coffee of choice, maybe an espresso.
More miles than ever before, exceeding 10,000 miles of curb and gutter. The street department has 5 sweepers that run during the spring and summer, and 7 sweepers that run during the fall.
Penyo poppers. Pumped about. Thank you.
If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault.
Come on. And his trucks.
This is something totally unique and different. In our restaurant, we do a barbecue loaded potatoes.
While above average temperatures hold steady into Wednesday, cold air comes crashing into the region on the back edge of a weak system. Temperatures by day and by night, as a result, return to near and even below average levels. This cool down is expected to last into next week and even toward the end of the month. As a result, we'll likely be able to avoid setting records for warmth this month. Make no mistake though, we'll still likely end the month of January well above average. We'll revisit the topic in about 2 weeks to see exactly where the first month of 2021 lands in the record books.
And by contributions to this...
A page in American history.
The 46th President of the United States officially taking office today.
President Joe Biden tonight wasting no time. On his first day in office, the president began dismantling Donald Trump's legacy by signing a series of executive actions that reverse course on immigration, climate change, racial equality, and the handling of the coronavirus pandemic.
President Trump.
A new twist in a decades-old cold case involving a suspect arrested in Sioux Falls.
And we show you the plans for a new apartment complex in downtown Sioux Falls on tonight's Your Money Matters.
Good evening. 6 South Dakotans received 11th hour pardons from President Trump as he left office. But one pardon is more controversial than the rest.
Vermilion native and longtime conservative political activist Paul Erickson received a pardon which was supported by Kellyanne Conway.
Erickson was the boyfriend of Russian operative Maria Butina, who was deported back to Russia after admitting that she sought to infiltrate conservative political groups to promote Russia's agenda. However, Erickson's crimes didn't have to do with espionage, but rather fraud.
And even though Erickson pled guilty to his crimes, the Trump administration said that his conviction was based off the Russian collusion hoax. And after finding no grounds to charge him with any crimes with respect to connections with Russia, he was charged with a minor financial crime.
The Trump White House announced 5 other pardons connected to South Dakota residents. KELO's Tom Hansen breaks them down for you.
Governor Kristi Noem thanked former President Trump for granting 5 pardons. The governor sent letters advocating for each one, beginning with Jessica "Jessie" Freeze, who now goes by the name Jessie Jean. The statement from the White House press secretary says Freeze was 20 years old in 2012 when she was convicted of converting stolen checks and negotiating them through the bank where she worked as a teller.
I didn't think I would get it. I mean, how many people apply for these? You know, like they don't come to everyone, and I just didn't know if I would get it. And oh man, it's like nerve-wracking, you know.
Noem's request says Freeze served a 2-year sentence. She is now a mother studying to be an EMT. President Trump granted a full pardon to John Nystrom of Pierre. Nystrom was convicted in 2009. Noem's pardon request says Nystrom failed to alert the proper authorities when he learned that a subcontractor was receiving double payments for work performed on the Crow Creek Tribal School. Mr. Nystrom took full responsibility for his oversight and tried to pay back the Crow Creek tribe before pleading guilty. Noem's request goes on to say that Nystrom teaches Sunday school, volunteers, and previously served as a county commissioner. President Trump also granted full pardons to Gregory and Deborah Jorgensen and a posthumous pardon to Martin Jorgensen of Ideal, South Dakota. The Jorgensens marketed beef under the Dakota Lean brand. A statement from the White House reads, "When demand outstripped supply, Gregory, Deborah, and Martin mixed in inferior commercial beef trim and knowingly sold misbranded beef." The pardon was also supported by Senator Mike Rounds because of the Jorgensens' record of service to their community and their remorse. In a statement released today, the governor says the Trump administration has done an excellent job of balancing justice with forgiveness. Tom Hansen, KELOLAND News.
The president's pardon power is limited to federal offenses.
An 80-year-old Sioux Falls man charged in a cold case murder investigation in Minnesota is no longer in jail. KELOLAND News has learned that Elgene Vossen has been released, and it all has to do with his declining health. 80-year-old Elgene Vossen was charged last summer in the 1974 stabbing death of Mabel Herman of Wilmer, Minnesota. Vossen was supposed to have a court hearing earlier this month in Kandiyohi County, but it was health.
From the WHO, Biden says that is not the case. They think they actually need to still be part of the WHO moving forward in dealing with this pandemic, given we are moving into the vaccine distribution phase. But that's not all. He also says he is going to rejoin the Paris Climate Accords. Officials say they believe that's going to take about 30 days for that to go back into effect. That is a notable mark of a moment that happened in the early years of the Trump presidency, something that he touted even just recently in recent days while talking about his accomplishments while in office. But Jake, on top of that, it's even domestic issues as well. They have suspended construction of the president's border wall. Of course, that's the border wall that Mexico was not paying for, despite what the president had promised. He also signed that order mandating masks be worn on federal grounds. That's something that health advisors had gone to President Trump over. He had refused to do, just arguing really whether the merit was worth it. Biden signed that into order on his first day in office. And you're also seeing other things trying to reverse the president's environmental agenda, trying to restore those federal efforts at diversity as well that you see going on. I want to make sure I didn't forget any. Of course, also the other one, which was one of the first things you saw Donald Trump do when he got into office, which was that ban on traveling from predominantly Muslim countries. They are reversing that. So you're seeing throughout these executive orders, Jake, really what they intend to do with the Biden administration over the next few years. And it is basically not only pursuing their own agenda, it is undoing basically Donald Trump's agenda. And they are going at it. And we should note one more on Klain, the new chief of staff, sent out basically a regulatory freeze, telling agency heads that if there are any pending rules happening at their agencies that haven't actually been fully installed yet, they should stop them dead in their tracks so they can conduct a review. And that seems pretty much aimed at making sure that those orders don't actually go into effect. Some of those could have been ones that the president tried to put in place during his last few days or hours in office, Jake.
That's right, and Caitlin, we should note, of course, that travel ban on individuals from predominantly Muslim countries has its roots in a completely bigoted proclamation that Donald Trump made as a candidate, where he wanted to ban all Muslims from entering the country, and then the administration did everything it could to back its way into some way to do that in a legal way, but it's deeply rooted in religious bigotry. That's the origin from 2015, December 2015. So even though the version he has now is legal, its roots were completely contrary to what the United States stands for. Caitlin Collins, thanks so much. And Dana, let me just read one quick excerpt from this one.
Today. We do, and the leases will be reviewed by our team.
The leases, part of the 103 Trump-era actions on the environment and public health, to be reviewed by the Biden White House. The new administration is also expected to target the makers of autos and appliances with more stringent efficiency requirements and issue new restrictions on oil and gas companies. limiting their access to federal lands. On race, Mr. Biden issued an executive order to dissolve the 1776 Commission, a Trump-era panel meant to foster patriotic education and to rebut the, quote, web of lies about systemic racism in the U.S. For example, in its report, the commission called affirmative action the opposite of what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision for the nation was. On Twitter, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo added that wokeism, multiculturalism, and all the isms, they're not who America is. They distort our glorious founding and what this country is all about. But Nicole Hannah-Jones, the creator of the Pulitzer Prize-winning 1619 Project, which the president called toxic propaganda, shot back. When you say that multiculturalism is not who America is and distorts our glorious founding, you unwittingly confirm the argument of the 1619 Project, that though we were a multiracial nation from our founding, our founders set forth a government of white rule. Cool. Now, Shannon, while supporters of the new administration's policies insist it's not woke to emphasize better stewardship of the environment or to acknowledge racial and gender inequality, the age-old question seems fitting. How much is too much and how far is far enough? It's an argument that will obviously play out in our government over the next couple of years at least, and ultimately at the ballot box as well. Shannon?
There's always an election not far off, Kevin.
Yeah,
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The Twitter account for the U.S. ambassador to Israel reads exactly that tonight, following a change to the title earlier in the...
It's clearly one of the big challenges they're grappling with, in addition, of course, to the coronavirus and the economy.
Doctor, we're so glad to have you as well. People look back at John Kennedy's historic inaugural address and are surprised to remember that not one domestic issue was in that speech. It was all foreign affairs, all about America's place in the world. Just as I think 50 years from now, people will look back on today surprised that our incoming president warned that the most dangerous phase of our pandemic is probably sitting right there in front of us. These days we're losing 4,000 souls a day. I know you do medicine and not politics, but I'm also guessing you have the most hope for the future concurrently tonight.
I do, Brian, and kind of an opportune time. I'm actually on clinical service right now, and we're on board round in the afternoon and stopped to hear the inaugural speech from President Biden. And the thing that struck me very much to what Bill and Susan just said is just the change in tone, right? We healthcare workers, for the last few months, you know, we've existed in this reality where we go to work and we see the devastation of this pandemic on our communities and our patients, and we leave work and there are parts of the American segment of our population that don't even believe the pandemic is real, and a White House that seems to be actively downplaying this existential crisis. And today the tone, everything else that in terms of actions that are going to be taken next come from this tone, and the tone is that this is one of the largest crises facing us right now, and things like joining the fight against COVID-19 by joining WHO, the international fight to sort of find solutions, the beefing up of the federal response here domestically, but also forward-looking things such as reinstating the National Security Council's Directorate for Global Health Security Threats, you know, and biological threats. All of that tells me that this is now front and center, and that we're not downplaying it. We're putting this at the front of all of our minds, and something that all of us both individually need to do and what our government needs to do moving forward.
And Susan Page, back to politics and the West Wing. I think the first true partnership of the modern era, certainly the one that I first got to see, was Carter-Mondale. With that in mind and President-VP relationships we've known over the past couple of decades, what kind of vice president do you think Vice President Harris needs to be and intends to be?
Well, the thing about vice presidents, you can only be the kind of vice president your president will let you be. And the good news for Kamala Harris is that Joe Biden has served in that role for 8 years. He has a sense of how it can be used effectively, how the relationship can work best. So I think that indicates that he wants to have the kind of vice president that he was to Barack Obama, and that is someone who was in the room, someone who had the president's ear, especially at that final decision-making moment. No question, it's the president, not the vice president, who makes those decisions. But I think that Kamala Harris is going to be in a good position to have a loud voice, a powerful voice in this administration. And I think we saw an easy relationship to the degree that you can make judgments from what you can see in public. They seem to have an easy, friendly relationship in public today after she was sworn in, when she turned around and he looked exuberant at the fact that she had just taken this groundbreaking office. That is a good sign, I think, looking ahead.
You're so right that he has his experience to rely on, being a full partner to Barack Obama for 8 years. Hey, Phil, my friend, trigger warning. The spotlight eluded a certain man today. That would be the only private citizen tonight in the state of Florida who's been twice impeached. What did we miss today by not covering him?
You know, Brian, I think he is wishing that we had covered him all day, but look, he took off from the South Lawn of the White House shortly before 9 a.m. this morning, and it was almost immediate that he disappeared from our minds. The nation's attention turned to Biden, to Harris, to the young poet laureate, to glimpses of the Obamas and what Michelle Obama was wearing, and then seeing them interacting with the Bushes and the Clintons. And Trump just wasn't there. He chose not to be a part of that club. He chose not to participate in this pageantry of American democracy. And because of that, he has ceded the spotlight. He's not on anybody's tongues tonight. He's silenced on Twitter. So even if he had thoughts about what transpired today, it would be more difficult for him to communicate them to the American public. And according to our reporting, he flew down to Florida with his family. He's at Mar-a-Lago, his private club in Palm Beach, where he plans to take up residence. And, you know, one interesting thing that happened today on his part is in his final minutes as president, he decided to issue one additional pardon. And it was to the ex-husband of Jeanine Pirro, Judge Jeanine of Fox News Channel fame. She apparently was upset, according to some of the reporting out there, that the president had not included him in his overnight pardons last night. And so he made the staff scrambled to put together the paperwork in the final minutes of this presidency to add him to the list and grant him clemency.
Dr. Padilla, we have reports that California is running out of vaccine. We have many reports that New York is running dangerously low on vaccine. It now turns out that what warp speed meant was the development of a vaccine. Warp speed had basically nothing to do with getting it in American arms. Would you suggest, and do you predict, the new president will use the Federal Production Act, the Defense Production Act, to ramp this up, use the military if need be, get these shots in arms, get this in every drugstore parking lot, big box store parking lot, civic center, stadiums, arenas, and so on?
Yeah, Brian, I think that part of the outgoing administration strategy had been to let states do what they needed to do within their borders after they had sort of put together the vaccines. And I think we've seen that that's failed because we're all connected and the supply chains are all connected as well. What the Biden administration has signaled is that they are going to try to turn vaccines into vaccinations by using the full force of things such as the Defense Production Act to create those extra doses, but really not just leave it up to the state, but work in partnership with the states to create within states things like federally funded community vaccination centers. And actually, you're seeing some of these plans already come into place. For example, Fenway Park in my own Boston is going to be a vaccination site opening up soon. And you're also seeing dedication to creating the workforce that's actually going to vaccinate people by having a federal community, a public health workforce that might be trained to do this. So all of those things will help us convert the promise of these vaccines into vaccinations into people's arms. But it will take time. You know, this is 20th of January and 1.9 trillion is not yet approved. And so we need to keep measuring using those public health measures.
Got to say, that's the only allowable mention of Fenway Park on this broadcast. Phil Rucker, Susan Page, Dr. Naheed Bhadia, thank you, and thanks to all of you, by the way, for the contributions you've made to this broadcast and our understanding. Coming up, a look at the challenges, and there are many, facing this brand new president and his brand new White House staff. We'll talk about all of it with an official of the new White House team when our special coverage of the inauguration of President Joe Biden continues.
What's my safe flight story? I spent a lot
helping to distribute the vaccine. You heard